The Chancellor was said to be barren, so he married me while I was pregnant to bring fortune into his house. The first cry of my child came from somewhere deep within the snowy night. It rose again and again, so thin and fragile that it sounded like the flame of a candle snapping beneath the wind. I knelt on the frozen floor, blood still wet beneath me. Both my hands clutched the midwife's skirt, my nails digging so deeply into the fabric that they nearly tore into her flesh. "Give her back to me." My voice broke. "Please give me back my child." The rear door of the country estate stood half open. Snow swept through the gap in violent gusts, carrying needles of ice that cut through my soaked clothing. My entire body trembled, but I could no longer feel the cold. I could barely feel the pain. I had only just given birth. My daughter had rested in my arms for no more than a few breaths. Her eyes had not even opened before someone tore her away. The midwife refused to meet my gaze. She kept backing away, her lips trembling, saying nothing. Then a soft laugh drifted in from outside. Sweet, gentle, more poisonous than a blade. "Sister, look at you. Do you truly believe you are still worthy of holding that child?" I raised my head. My half-sister Vanessa stood beneath the covered corridor, a white fox fur cloak wrapped around her slender body. A pearl ornament swayed in her hair, catching the lantern light with every slight movement. Her face was as delicate and innocent as ever, untouched by blood, filth, or guilt. And in her arms, she held my daughter. I dragged myself toward her. "Vanessa." The sound scraped out of my throat. "She is your niece, too. Please give her back to me." Vanessa lowered her eyes to the swaddled infant. Her smile deepened. "You are mistaken, sister. How could a bastard of unknown origin be worthy of becoming my niece?" My entire body jolted. I lunged forward, trying to seize the child. Two old servants rushed from behind me and forced me down. My cheek struck the icy tiles, melted snow, and the metallic smell of blood flooded my nose. My daughter began to cry. It was a small, brief sound, like a needle driven straight into my heart. "Do not touch her." I struggled until my wounds tore open again. "Vanessa, I will give you anything. You can have my engagement, my dowry, even my place as the legitimate daughter of the Marquis of Xinhuan. Just give me back my child." Vanessa crouched before me. The tip of her embroidered shoe lifted my chin. The pity in her eyes was like a thin layer of sugar spread over rot. "Sister, why do you still not understand? It is not that I insist on stealing your possessions. You have stood in my way from the moment you were born. You were already ruined, yet you continued occupying the place of the legitimate daughter. Young Lord Gio broke his engagement with you, yet your existence still reminded everyone that I was born of a secondary wife. You should have died that night at Lantai Villa. Instead, you survived and even conceived a child." Her voice dropped. "But it does not matter. After tonight, no one will remember you." Madame Lu, my stepmother, walked toward us from the corridor. In her hands was a celadon cup painted with lotus blossoms. The medicine inside was black and steaming. I recognized that cup. It belonged to her favorite tea set. On ordinary days, she would not even allow my father to touch it, yet she was willing to use it to send me to my death. Madame Lu sighed with the tenderness of a grieving mother. "Lily, the Marquis estate raised you. It is time you learn to be sensible. As long as you remain alive, you will only ruin your sister's future. The Gu family has already softened. Once you are gone, she will soon marry into their household with honor." I stared at her. "That night at Lantai Villa was arranged by the two of you." She did not deny it. She merely shook her head with false regret. "If you must blame someone, blame your unfortunate fate. You were the legitimate daughter of the first wife. Your dead mother left behind too large a dowry. And of all the women in the capital, the Chancellor's household chose to ask whether they might marry you, an unmarried woman already carrying a child, to bring auspicious fortune into their family." The Chancellor's household. My lashes trembled. After my pregnancy had been discovered in my previous life, the Chancellor's household had indeed sent someone to the Marquis of Xinhuan's estate. The Grand Chancellor Julian held power over the entire imperial court. Yet rumor claimed that he could never father a child. The Julian matriarch believed deeply in fate. When she heard that the legitimate daughter of the Marquis of Xinhuan had conceived before marriage, She came up with the idea of welcoming me into the family to bring fertility and good fortune. At the time, I had considered the proposal the greatest humiliation of my life. I had knelt before my father and wept, insisting I would rather die than marry Julian. I had believed such a marriage would nail me forever to a pillar of shame. Only when I was dying did I realize that it might have been the only path that could have saved both me and my child, and I had rejected it with my own hands. The poison was forced between my lips. As it burned its way down my throat, I twisted desperately toward Vanessa. The bundle in her arms had stopped moving at that moment. Heaven and earth shattered. I clenched half of a broken jade pendant in my palm. Its jagged edge cut into my flesh, and blood seeped slowly between my fingers. I hated them. I hated my own stupidity. I hated my weakness. Most of all, I hated that although I had done nothing wrong, I had wasted my final days begging the guilty to believe in my innocence. If there was another life, if I could live once more, I would never again kneel and ask them to believe me. I would protect my child, and every person who had harmed me would be forced to kneel and watch me live. My lady, a frantic voice suddenly rang beside my ear. I opened my eyes. There was no crumbling room at the country estate. There was no cup of poison in the snowy night. Above me hung a bed canopy embroidered with peonies, pale blue tassels swaying along its edge. Birds chirped beyond the window. Agarwood incense burned in the room, its familiar fragrance making my chest ache for a long while. I could not move. Then I slowly lowered my eyes. There was no blood from childbirth on my body. No bruises from servants forcing me against the ground. My hands were smooth and pale. My fingertips trembled as I pressed them against my abdomen. It was still flat, and yet beneath my palm, there was the faintest trace of warmth, like a seed that had not yet broken through the soil. Clara knelt beside the bed. She was only 16 or 17, her eyes swollen red from crying. The moment she saw me awaken, she rushed forward to support me. My lady, you are finally awake. I stared at her young, living face. My throat tightened. In my previous life, Clara had tried to protect me and was sold by Madame Lou to the northern frontier. Later, while trapped at the country estate, I heard that she had attempted to escape. They caught her. They broke one of her legs. But now she was kneeling before me, alive and unharmed. I had returned. I had truly returned. Before I could speak, my father's furious voice came from the outer room. Physician. Say that again. The household physician answered in a trembling voice. My Lord Marquis, the eldest young lady's pulse is smooth and strong. It is undoubtedly the pulse of pregnancy. I estimate that she has been with child for approximately 2 months. Silence fell. Then my father roared. Wretched creature. The curtain was thrown aside. My father, Lord Shin, strode into the room. Madame Lou and Vanessa followed behind him. The moment I saw them, the poisoned wine, the child's fading cries, and their laughter from that snowy night surged through my bones. Madame Lou wore a pale lotus-colored robe. Her eyes were red as though she had spent the entire night weeping. Vanessa supported her by the arm. Her moon-white skirt brushed softly across the floor, while concern filled her delicate face. How familiar. It was exactly the same as before in my previous life. My father had raged. Madame Lou had pretended to be heartbroken. Vanessa had wept as she urged me to kill myself to preserve the family's honor. I had knelt on the floor and explained again and again that someone had framed me at Lantai Villa. My father had cared only that I had disgraced the Marquis estate. Madame Lou had cried that misfortune had entered the family. Vanessa had embraced me, leaned close to my ear, and whispered, Sister, if you still possess any sense of shame, you should hang yourself with a length of white silk. I had believed her. I had almost taken the silk. Now, when I looked at them, I found the entire performance laughable. My father charged toward the bed and raised his hand. You still dare to awaken. Lily. How did the Marquis of Xinwan's household produce a daughter like you? Clara cried out and threw herself in front of me. I gently moved her aside. My father's palm cut through the air. It stopped beside my face. I lifted my eyes and looked at him calmly. Father should think carefully before allowing that hand to fall. He froze. My voice was quiet, but every word was clear. The Chancellor's household came yesterday to ask whether I would marry into their family. If they return today and find a mark on my face, how does father intend to explain it? The room became instantly silent. My father's hand remained suspended in the air. The grief on Madame Lu's face froze. A faint shadow passed through Vanessa's eyes. She quickly spoke in a gentle voice. Sister, what nonsense are you saying? Why would a family like the Chancellor's truly marry you? You are carrying a child of unknown origin. If you entered their household, the entire capital would laugh at you. I turned toward her. Why are you so anxious, sister? She stiffened. With Clara's help, I slowly sat up. If the entire capital laughs at me, would that not suit you perfectly? Vanessa's eyes immediately filled with tears. Why would you think so poorly of me? I am only worried for you. A woman's chastity and reputation are everything. If you marry while pregnant, your entire life will be ruined. I watched her hover on the edge of tears. Then I laughed softly. If I refuse to marry, will my life somehow remain unruined? Her lips parted. I did not give her the opportunity to continue her performance. Or do you believe I should do as you suggested outside my door and hang myself with white silk? Would that restore honor to the Marquis estate? Vanessa's face went white. My father turned sharply toward her. You said such a thing? She shook her head in panic. Father, I did not. I was too worried for sister. I spoke without thinking. Madame Lu immediately interrupted. My lord, these small matters are not important. The true problem is the child in Lily's womb. She conceived before marriage. If this becomes public, everyone in the capital will point at our family in disgust. My father's expression darkened again. He looked at me without affection. There was only loathing and calculation in his eyes. Who is the father? In my previous life, that question had shattered me because I truly did not know. On the night at Lantai Villa, Vanessa's maid had come to me and claimed my father had summoned me urgently. The moment I entered the villa, I smelled a strange fragrance. After that, my memories broke apart. When I awakened, my clothing was disordered, and half a jade pendant lay beside me. I did not know who had been in that room. I did not know how I had been pushed into the trap. I had believed that if I told my father I had been harmed, he would investigate. He never did. He only asked why I had not killed myself. This time I met his gaze. I do not know. His face turned livid. You dare say you do not know. I truly do not. I pushed aside the covers and stepped out of bed, my bare feet touching the cold tiles. That is precisely why the matter must be investigated. Madame Lu gave a cold laugh. Investigated? Have you not humiliated us enough? I looked directly at her. What are you afraid an investigation might reveal? Mother? That it was sister's maid who delivered the false message that night? Or that someone might discover where the incense burning inside Lantai Villa came from? Madame Lu's face changed violently. Vanessa's fingers tightened around her handkerchief. Those tiny reactions did not escape me. In my previous life, I had not been certain of their involvement until the night I died. Now I understood that their fear had begun much earlier than I realized. My father frowned. What do you mean? Madame Lu answered at once. My lord, Lily is trying to escape responsibility by accusing others. I did not argue. Arguments were useless. I had explained myself too many times in my previous life, and no one had believed me. This time, I would not ask them to believe. I would make them afraid not to. I turned to my father. Father, there are only two paths before you. The first is to send me to a remote estate, wait until I give birth, and then dispose of me quietly. But the Chancellor's household already made inquiries yesterday. The capital will soon hear of it. If the Chancellor believes the Marquis of Xinhuan has toyed with his household, can father endure the consequences? My father's expression grew darker. The second path is to accept the marriage. No matter what the city says, the Marquis of Xinhuan will become connected to the Chancellor's household. Father has been ignored at court for years. Do you truly intend to waste this opportunity to regain influence? My words struck precisely where he was weakest. The Marquis of Xinhuan's household was no longer the glorious military family it had once been. My father was mediocre. Madame Lu had squandered much of our property. For years, his greatest desire had been to return to the center of imperial power. However, Many rumors clung to the Chancellor's offer. He could not bear to let such a branch slip from his grasp. Madame Lu became alarmed. "My lord, you cannot agree. If she marries in her present condition, she will only disgrace us further." I spoke evenly. "Is mother truly worried that I will disgrace the Marquis estate? Or are you afraid I might survive long enough to enter the Chancellor's household?" Her pupils contracted. I walked toward her one step at a time. "If I die, everything my mother left behind will fall permanently into your hands. My engagement can also be transferred to Vanessa without resistance. Your calculations are loud enough for the entire capital to hear." Madame Lu raised her hand to strike me. This time I did not move. Clara was faster. She rushed between us and cried, "Madam, the young lady is pregnant. You cannot strike her." Madame Lu's hand stopped, not because she cared for me, because she heard the word pregnant. The child inside me was both a stain and a bargaining piece. I steadied Clara and turned to my father. "Father, inform the Chancellor's household. I will marry him." The room went deathly still. Vanessa finally lost control. She stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Sister, have you gone mad? Chancellor is rumored to be unable to father children, and everyone says his nature is cold and ruthless. You are carrying another man's child. If he comes to despise you, you will have nowhere left to return." I looked at her and laughed. Return? In my previous life, I had tried to return. I had begged my father, begged my stepmother, begged my half-sister, begged the Gu family, and all my pleading had earned me was a cup of poison. My voice turned cold. "Vanessa, from this day onward, I do not require a road back. I am going forward." My father stared at me for a long time. There was anger in his eyes, shame, and a calculation he could not hide. At last he spoke through clenched teeth. "Have you thought this through? If the Chancellor's household comes to despise you, the Marquis of Xinhuan will not support you." I smiled. "Do not worry, father. From this day onward, I no longer expect this household to support me." The word struck him like a slap. His expression became hideous at that moment. The steward's panicked voice came from outside. "My Lord Marquis, someone from the Chancellor's household has arrived." Everyone stiffened. I slowly closed my eyes. They had come. The hand I had failed to take in my previous life had once again reached toward me. A short while later, a man dressed in fitted black robes entered the room. A long saber hung at his waist, and his back was straight. He saluted my father with flawless courtesy, yet his voice remained cold. "Marquisian." My father immediately replaced his fury with a smile. "Lord Marcus, what brings you here? Does the Chancellor have instructions?" So his name was Marcus. I had never seen him in my previous life, though I had heard that Julian possessed a personal guard whose methods were as sharp as a blade, and who rarely failed in any task. Marcus did not exchange pleasantries with my father. He turned toward me. His gaze did not settle upon my abdomen as everyone else's did. There was no contempt in his eyes. With both hands, he presented a white jade token. "By the Chancellor's command, I have come to ask Lady Shen one question." My chest tightened as I looked at the token. Marcus continued. "The Chancellor said that if Lady Shen is willing to enter his household, the Chancellor's estate will protect both you and your child. If Lady Shen is unwilling, the Chancellor will still investigate the old case at Lantai Villa and restore justice to your name." Everyone in the room stared at him. Even I remained silent for several breaths. In my previous life, I had known only that the Chancellor's household had proposed marriage. I had never known Julian had offered me another choice. If I married him, he would protect us. If I refused, he would still investigate the case at the darkest moment of my life. Someone had truly offered me a road to survival despite every poisonous rumor in the capital. I had simply been too frightened, too weak, too concerned with the reputation that had already begun devouring me. And so, I had pushed that road away with my own hands. My eyes burned. But this time I did not cry. I reached out and accepted the white jade token. The jade was cold against my palm. Its weight steadied me. "Please give the Chancellor my answer. Shen Lily is willing to marry him." Marcus bowed. "The Chancellor also said that he will come personally in 3 days. Your dowry procession and every ceremonial courtesy will follow the rites due to his principal wife." his principal wife. All color drained from Madame Lu's face. Vanessa stared at the jade token in my hand, hatred nearly spilling from her eyes. They had expected me to weep and beg for death as I had before. They had expected the child inside me to become the stone that crushed me. They did not understand. In this life, my child was not my shame. She was the life I had carried back from hell. After Marcus departed, no one spoke for a long time. With Clara's help, I returned to the bed. My father now regarded me differently. Madame Lu no longer dared speak carelessly. Vanessa bit her lip and said softly, "Sister, I was only worried about you. Please do not blame me." I looked at her. "Do not worry." Her eyes brightened. She believed I had softened as I always had before. "I do not blame you." I continued. "I will investigate you." The expression on her face froze completely. I looked down at the jade token in my palm. The corner of my mouth slowly curved. In 3 days, I would put on my wedding robes and leave this man-eating Marquis estate with my child. Those who had harmed me, humiliated me, forced me, and killed me in my previous life could wait. This time I would not pray for innocence to fall from heaven. I would dig the truth out with my own hands, and I would make the entire capital see whose blood truly flowed in the veins of the child they had called a stain. The debts of that snowy night would now be collected one by one. News that the Chancellor would come personally to marry me in 3 days spread through the capital like boiling oil thrown into flame. By the second day, people had begun gathering outside the gates of the Marquis of Xinhuan's estate. Some claimed I had extraordinary luck. Although I carried a child of unknown origin, I had still managed to climb into the Chancellor's household. Others mocked Julian for grasping at any hope of an heir if he could not father a child himself. They said, perhaps he was willing to raise another man's. When those words reached my courtyard, Clara's eyes turned red with anger. "My lady, they know nothing. What right do they have to say such things about you?" I sat beside the window, examining the old accounts my mother had left behind. Without looking up, I turned another page. Their mouths belong to them. Let them speak. But do you not feel wronged? My brush paused. Did I feel wronged? In my previous life, I had lain awake for entire nights, crushed by the injustice. I had wanted to tear out my heart and place it before them so they could see I was not the shameless woman they imagined. But I eventually understood that most people did not care about truth. They enjoyed watching a woman fall from a high place into the mud. Then they gathered around to step upon her, because trampling someone else made them feel pure and virtuous. In this life, I would not waste my strength explaining myself. I intended to live, and I intended to live with greater dignity than any of them believed possible. At dawn on the 3rd day, Madame Lu entered my courtyard. 4 old servants followed her, carrying 2 redwood chests. When the chests were opened, I saw several bolts of faded silk, a few pieces of old jewelry, and a scattering of silver. Clara's expression changed immediately. This can hardly be called the dowry of a marquis's legitimate daughter. Even a respected servant released from the household to marry would receive more. Madame Lu pressed a handkerchief to the corner of her eye. "Lily, I know this is unfair to you, but the marriage was arranged too quickly. The estate cannot gather sufficient funds at such short notice. Take these for now. I will send the remainder to you gradually." I had heard those exact words in my previous life. Back then, I had believed she was truly in difficulty. Only later did I learn that the 26 shops, 8 farming estates, and storehouses filled with gold, silver, and jewels left by my birth mother had slowly been transferred into Vanessa's name. Madame Lu had not withheld my dowry because nothing remained. She had withheld it because she never intended to let me survive long enough to carry it away. I did not become angry. I merely gestured for Clara to bring me the account book lying on the table. The moment Madame Lu saw it, her expression shifted. I smiled. "Mother says the estate lacks funds. Then how was the gold filigree headdress sister collected from the treasure pavilion yesterday paid for?" Her eyes flickered. "That was merely something Juana required for a banquet. It was charged to one of my mother's dowry shops." I interrupted. "Mother, over the years you have removed property from my mother's dowry under the names of repairs, household purchases, and temporary borrowing. I have recorded every item." Her face darkened. "Lily, this is your wedding day. Must you cause such an ugly scene?" The ugliness does not come from my demanding the return of my property. I closed the account book. It comes from stealing my possessions and expecting me to enter the Chancellor's household empty-handed. Servants had begun gathering quietly outside the courtyard at that moment. Vanessa arrived. She wore moon-white robes and almost no cosmetics, making her look especially delicate. Sister, Mother has struggled for years to manage this estate. How can you force her like this? You are about to become the Chancellor's wife. Why continue clinging to worldly possessions? I looked at her and smiled. If worldly possessions mean so little to you, begin by returning the South Sea pearl hairpin in your hair. Her hand immediately flew to her coiffure. That hairpin had belonged to my mother. In my previous life, Vanessa had worn it while standing outside the country estate, watching me beg for my daughter. Its pearls were round and luminous, making her face appear even more pitiful. I rose and walked toward her. Return the jade bracelet on your wrist, the pendant at your waist, the gold headdress you collected yesterday, and the rent from my mother's estate that you took last winter. If you truly consider possessions unimportant, give all of them back. Her face turned white. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Sister, why must you always humiliate me? I know I am only a concubine-born daughter and unworthy of fine things. But Mother took pity on me. She took pity on you, so she stole from me. Her sobbing stopped. I raised my voice. Clara, summon Father. Then take the account book to the front courtyard and read it aloud before the Chancellor's wedding procession. The people of the capital should hear how the Marquis of Xinwan provides for the marriage of his legitimate daughter. Madame Lu finally panicked. She could control me inside the estate, but she did not dare disgrace herself before the Chancellor. Nor could she allow my father to discover how much property she had taken. Stop, she called Clara back sharply. Her face shifted between blue and white. Go to the storehouse. Bring out the dowry chests. The servants exchanged glances before retreating to obey. Soon, chest after chest was carried into the courtyard, gold-threaded brocade, South Sea pearls, complete sets of gold ornaments, carved jade decorations, deeds to farmland and shops, the sandalwood folding screen my mother had brought into her marriage, even the 9 phoenix golden crown she had worn on her own wedding day. 64 full dowry chests filled my courtyard. The watching servants' expressions changed. Madame Lu stood to one side, looking as though someone had peeled the skin from her face. I gave her no opportunity to preserve her dignity. Clara checked every object against the account book. Anything missing was announced. Anything short was recorded. At last, Clara returned to my side with the account book in her arms. My lady, 2 chests of gold ornaments are missing, along with a case of Eastern pearls and the deed to the embroidery shop in the southern district. Vanessa's eyes flickered. I turned toward her. Sister, what unfortunate timing, all of those items appear to be inside your courtyard. She opened her mouth, preparing to cry again. I no longer had the patience. Return them. Lily, Madame Lu said through clenched teeth. If Mother cannot bear to part with them, I will carry this account book into the bridal sedan. In the end, servants carried the 2 chests of gold, the case of pearls, and the shop deed out of Vanessa's courtyard. She remained where she stood. Tears clung to her face, but there was no softness left in her eyes. Only hatred. I knew she hated me. But this was merely the beginning. In my previous life, she had taken far more than lifeless objects. At 1/4 past the hour of the dragon, noise erupted outside. The Chancellor has arrived. I looked toward the courtyard gate. Julian had come in person. He wore crimson ceremonial robes beneath a black cloak. His features were cold and composed. His figure tall and lean. The wedding procession behind him stretched the length of the street. Red silk and golden bells stirred in the wind, and the force of his arrival silenced even the spectators gathered outside the estate. My father hurried forward to greet him, smiling with greater enthusiasm than if he had been receiving an imperial decree. My Lord Chancellor, how could we trouble you to come personally? Julian did not look at him. His gaze settled upon the dowry chests filling my courtyard. The Marquis of Xinwan's household appears to be having a lively wedding. My father's expression stiffened. Madame Lu hurried forward and forced a smile. It is only the marriage of a daughter, a few insignificant matters of the women's quarters. I apologize for allowing your excellency to witness them. Julian answered calmly. Nothing concerning my wife is insignificant. The entire courtyard fell silent. My wife? He called me that in front of everyone. I looked at him. Something gently struck the wall of ice around my heart. Julian walked toward me and extended his hand. Lily, come home with me. I lowered my eyes to his hand. It was long and pale with several faint old scars across the palm. I had rejected this hand in my previous life. Now it was offered to me again. I placed my hand in his. His palm was cool, but his grip was steady. The gates of the Marquis estate were crowded with spectators. When I emerged in a phoenix crown and scarlet wedding robes, their whispers surged like a tide. That is the Shin daughter who entered the Chancellor's household while pregnant. How shameless. Is Chancellor Julian not unable to father children? He is raising another man's child. Quiet. That is the Chancellor. Supported by Julian's hand, I deliberately slowed my steps as I entered the sedan. I wanted them to see me clearly. I was not drowning in tears. I had not hanged myself from a length of white silk. The Marquis estate had not secretly sent me away. I wore the proper red robes of a principal wife. I carried every piece of my mother's dowry. And I entered the Chancellor's household openly with my head raised. Before the curtain of the carriage fell, Julian stopped and turned toward the crowd. His voice was not loud, yet its coldness silenced the entire street. From this day forward, anyone who uses malicious rumors to disturb my wife will be invited to answer questions at the Ministry of Justice. Not another word was spoken. The carriage began to move. Only after the sounds of the procession carried us far from the Marquis estate did I slowly loosen my clenched hands. My palms were damp with sweat. Julian sat opposite me. He offered me a handkerchief. I stared at it. Wipe your hands, he said. I accepted it, then asked, does the Chancellor not wish to know why I insisted on recovering my dowry today? It was yours. Outsiders will call me greedy. He looked at me calmly. A woman requires money and property in her own hands if she wishes to preserve a path of retreat. There is no shame in needing such a path. My fingers tightened around the handkerchief. In my previous life, everyone had told me to endure, to yield, to sacrifice myself for the dignity of the Marquis estate. This was the first time anyone had told me there was no shame in protecting my escape. I lowered my eyes. That does not sound like something most men in the capital would say. Most men in the capital are fools. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Then my eyes began to burn. Outside the carriage, drums thundered and red silk covered the road. I suddenly wished I could speak to the woman I had been in my previous life. Look, we have finally left the Marquis estate. This time we were not driven away. Someone came to bring us home. The Chancellor's estate was colder than I had imagined. Not the coldness of neglect or decay, but the chill of a place too orderly and too quiet. Beyond the vermilion gates lay deep courtyards and winding covered corridors. Servants moved without sound. White plum trees bloomed beneath the snow. From a distance, they looked like moonlight that refused to melt. I was taken to the principal courtyard. Dragon and phoenix candles had already been lit inside the bridal chamber. Their warm light reflected from the red silk decorating the room. Yet even that brightness could not entirely soften the reserved austerity of the estate. Clara helped me sit down. The Chancellor's household has so many rules, she whispered. I murmured in agreement. Rules were not always a bad thing. Clear rules were better than the Marquis of Xinhuan's household, where wolves wrapped themselves in the skin of family affection. Julian entered not long afterward. Cold air and the faint scent of snow followed him into the room. With one movement of his hand, he dismissed all the servants. Clara looked at me anxiously. I nodded before she finally retreated beyond the door. Only Julian and I remained. He did not speak the usual blessings expected of a bridegroom. He did not pretend tenderness or attempt to approach me. He placed a document on the table, an agreement. I lifted my veil and looked at him, presenting a contract to the bride on the wedding night. The Chancellor is indeed unusual. His expression remained unchanged. Our marriage is unusual. I walked to the table and opened the document. Its terms were clear. First, the Chancellor's household would protect me and the child in my womb. Second, I would assist him in investigating the old case at Lantai Villa. Third, after the child's birth, regardless of what the investigation revealed, if I wished to leave, The Chancellor would give me a residence, 10,000 taels of silver, and guards who would protect me for the remainder of my life. My gaze lingered upon the third condition. In this world, marriage was like a woman's name being written into someone else's family registry, a father, a husband, a son, layer after layer, binding her until she had no existence of her own. Yet on our wedding night, Julian was offering me a road away from him. I raised my eyes. Are you not afraid I will take the silver and disappear? You will not. Why? If you merely wish to flee, you would not have reclaimed your dowry in front of the entire household 3 days ago. I smiled. He judged people accurately. I picked up the brush and wrote my name. You have given me 3 conditions. I also require 3. He lifted his eyes. Speak. First, anything I eat, any medicine intended to protect the pregnancy, and every object that comes into direct contact with me must be examined personally by Clara or me. Agreed. Second, until the case at Lantai Villa is solved, no one from the Marquis of Chinoise's household may meet me privately. Agreed. Third, regardless of who fathered the child in my womb, no one may use the child as part of a scheme before the birth. This time, Julian was silent. I did not urge him. I understood that my third condition was not simple for him. His decision to marry me was already one part of a larger trap. If the child became the sharpest bait, he might have an opportunity to draw the hidden enemy into the open more quickly. But this was my child. In my previous life, I had already allowed her to be used, taken, and murdered. In this life, no one would turn her into a chess piece. Julian studied me at last. He nodded. Agreed. Only then did I breathe more easily. When the contract was put away, silence settled over the room. I looked at the marriage bed covered in red dates and dried Longan fruit. Then I looked at him. Where will the Chancellor sleep tonight? He seemed not to expect such a direct question. One brow shifted almost imperceptibly. I continued. I am pregnant and cannot attend to you. If you need us to present the appearance of an affectionate marriage, I can cooperate. If not, there is a couch beside the window. You are remarkably frank. Being less frank would change nothing. I returned to the edge of the bed. My greatest concern is preserving this pregnancy. A soft laugh left him. It was quiet, like the first hairline fracture appearing across a frozen lake. Lily, you are more interesting than the rumors suggested. What do the rumors say? That you are constantly weeping, shameless, and desperate to cling to power. Then the Chancellor has suffered a poor bargain. I said. Seriously, my temper is not particularly gentle, and I rarely cry. He sat upon the couch. Not necessarily. At the very least, you negotiate well. That night, I slept on the bed while he remained on the couch. A room filled with red wedding candles lay between us. I had believed I would be unable to sleep. Perhaps leaving the Marquis estate had finally loosened the tension inside me. Perhaps my body was simply exhausted. Sometime after midnight, I fell into a deep sleep. But snow returned in my dreams. I saw the broken door at the country estate. I heard my daughter's cries moving farther and farther away. I ran after them with all my strength. I could never catch her. When I awakened, the sky was barely beginning to brighten. My hands still covered my abdomen. My fingertips were numb with cold. Clara entered with warm water. When she saw my pale face, she hurried toward me. Did you have another nightmare? Before I could answer, an elderly maid announced herself from outside. My lady, the Dowager Madam has sent pregnancy-preserving incense. It is an ancestral preparation of the Julian household and is said to calm the spirit and strengthen the child. The embroidered box was opened. A faint fragrance drifted through the room. In that instant, all the blood in my body turned cold. I had smelled this incense before in my previous life. While I was imprisoned at the country estate, Madame Lu had also sent me incense and claimed it would protect my pregnancy. At first, it caused only dizziness. Later came abdominal pain and bleeding. When my daughter was finally born, she was so weak she could barely cry. It had never been medicine to protect a child. It contained powdered frost scorpion, a substance that slowly damaged a pregnancy. I closed the box. My voice was steady. Summon the Chancellor. Clara stared at me. Now? Julian arrived quickly. He appeared to have only just returned from court. He had not changed from his official robes, and the faint chill of morning dew clung to him. What happened? I pushed the box toward him. You agreed last night that no one would interfere with anything intended to protect my pregnancy. He picked up the incense. He smelled it once. His gaze darkened. Marcus, bring physician Lou. Half an hour later, an elderly physician with white hair and beard was brought into the room. He scraped a small amount of ash into a bowl of water and added several drops of medicinal solution. The clear water quickly turned pale blue. The old physician's expression changed. My Lord Chancellor, the incense contains powdered frost scorpion. If a pregnant woman breathes it over time, she will suffer abdominal pain and blood loss. In severe cases, the child will be harmed. Clara dropped to her knees in shock. Who could be so vicious? I remained calm. Julian looked at me. Why did you suspect it immediately? My fingertips passed lightly over the edge of the embroidered box. I do not believe everyone in the Chancellor's household hopes to see me deliver a healthy child. He watched me for a moment. He did not press for further explanation. Investigate. Within an hour, the old maid who had delivered the incense was dragged into the principal courtyard. At first, she insisted that the Dowager Madam had sent it out of concern for me. Then, Marcus found silver notes from Susan, Julian's younger cousin, hidden in her room. The old woman collapsed and began striking her forehead against the floor, begging for mercy. Susan had lived in the Chancellor's household since childhood. Everyone in the capital claimed that if Julian had not been believed incapable of fathering children, she would long ago have become the mistress of his estate. Now I had entered his household while carrying a child. Naturally, she could not endure it. That evening, Julian took me to the Dowager Madam's courtyard. Susan knelt on the floor, weeping beautifully. Cousin, I only meant to send sister some incense out of kindness. I did not know anything had been placed inside it. The old maid must have done this to harm me. The Dowager Madam's expression was grave. The prayer beads in her fingers moved with unusual speed. Julian, Susan was raised in this household. She would never intentionally harm anyone. This is only the second day of your marriage. Why must the matter become so ugly? I stood beside Julian and said nothing. There were moments when 100 words from me would carry less force than a single sentence from him. He did not disappoint me. What punishment does the law prescribe for attempting to harm a pregnant woman? He asked calmly. Susan jerked her head upward. Cousin? The Dowager Madam became alarmed. She is your cousin. Julian looked at the old lady. There was no emotion in his voice. Lily is my wife. The room fell silent. My hand trembled faintly inside my sleeve. It was the second time he had said it. All color left Susan's face. Julian turned to Marcus. The maid who delivered the incense will be beaten to death. Susan is confined to the Lotus Court. Every servant close to her will be investigated again. All servants in the principal courtyard are to be replaced with people personally selected by me. The Dowager Madam's lips moved. In the end, she said nothing. Snow had stopped by the time we left. Lanterns glowed one after another along the corridor, illuminating the dusting of snow upon Julian's shoulders. I spoke suddenly. After dealing with the matter this way, are you not afraid the Dowager Madam will resent me? You did nothing wrong. But the Chancellor's household became troubled the moment I entered it. He stopped walking. Then he looked at me. Lily, you do not need to apologize to anyone for surviving. I froze. In my previous life, everyone had demanded an apology from me. I was told to apologize to my father, to the Marquis estate, to the Gu family, to Vanessa, even to the rumors themselves. But I had been the one who was harmed. I lowered my head, forcing down the ache rising behind my eyes. Speaking to me like this may cause a misunderstanding. What misunderstanding? I walked 2 steps ahead. My voice was so quiet the wind nearly carried it away. I may begin to believe that the third condition in our agreement will never be needed. There was a moment of silence behind me. Then I heard Julian laugh softly. 7 days after I entered the Chancellor's household, an invitation arrived from the palace. The Empress was holding a plum blossom banquet and had summoned the noble women and unmarried ladies of the capital. When the invitation was delivered to me, Julian had just returned from court. He glanced at it once before folding it shut. You do not need to attend. I was sewing the final stitch into a tiny garment for the child. At his words, I looked up. Why should I not go? You are pregnant. The palace will be crowded and there will be too many loose tongues. Precisely because there will be loose tongues, I must go. His gaze settled on me. I put down the needle and rested my fingers lightly against my abdomen. You may protect me for a day, but you cannot silence every mouth in the capital forever. I cannot spend the rest of my life hiding inside the Chancellor's estate. Julian was quiet for a moment. What do you intend to do? I smiled. Listen to them speak filth. Then make them close their mouths. The day of the plum blossom banquet dawned bright. After several days of snow, scarlet plum trees bloomed along both sides of the palace road. Their fragrance floated through the cold air, and from a distance, the blossoms looked like rouge pressed beneath white snow. I wore a deep crimson brocade gown beneath a white fox fur cloak. In my hair, I placed only a single jade ornament. As Clara helped me down from the carriage, she whispered, "My lady, everyone is looking at you." I know. Let them look. In my previous life, I had feared being watched. I had feared the contempt in their eyes. I had feared the whispers behind silk sleeves. I had feared that a single sentence would pierce me so deeply I could never lift my head again. In this life, I wanted them to see me clearly. I, Shen Lily, had not died. I had not hidden myself away. I was alive, and I was living well. A gathering of noble women had already formed in the plum viewing pavilion outside the main hall. Vanessa stood among them. She wore her favorite moonlight gown. Her eyes were faintly red, as though she had recently suffered some terrible grievance. The moment I approached, she called softly, "Sister." Her voice was not loud, but it was just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Sister, are you comfortable in the Chancellor's household? I have heard that the rules there are very strict. You are pregnant as well. If anyone causes you distress, you must tell your family." Her words sounded concerned. In truth, every sentence reminded the other women that I had entered the Chancellor's household while pregnant and that I was merely living beneath another family's authority. Someone nearby covered her mouth and laughed. Second Lady Shen is truly kind-hearted. After everything her elder sister has done, she still worries about her. Indeed, in my family, a sister like that would no longer exist. I turned toward the woman who had spoken. She wore a pink palace gown, her hair arranged high above her head. Arrogance filled her expression. "And this lady is?" She lifted her chin. "Lady Jiao, daughter of the Vice Minister of Rights." I nodded. "Lady Jiao, I have heard that Vice Minister Jiao took his sixth concubine last month, a trained courtesan purchased from Yangju. You must understand family honor very well." Lady Jiao's face turned crimson. The laughter around us stopped at once. Vanessa hurried to intervene. "Sister, Lady Jiao only feels sorry for you. Why must you speak so cruelly?" I looked at her. "You are always feeling sorry for me. Sister, allow me to return the kindness." Something flickered in her eyes. I took a small box from Clara and opened it. A jade clasp rested inside. Vanessa's face went white. I lifted the clasp and showed it to everyone. "This belongs to young Lord Jiao's belt. It was found in the rear courtyard of Orchid Fragrance Pavilion on the 7th day of the 3rd month. On that day, Sister claimed she had gone to a temple to pray for Mother. Yet the proprietor of Orchid Fragrance Pavilion remembers that she spent an entire hour in a private room with a young gentleman dressed in blue." A wave of shock passed through the gathering. Young Lord Jiao had been my former fiancé. After the incident at Lantai Villa, he had immediately broken our engagement and condemned me as unchaste. Yet he and Vanessa had already been meeting in secret before I was ruined. The jade clasp was the first piece of evidence I ordered someone to retrieve after my rebirth. Vanessa's eyes reddened at once. "Sister, how can you slander me like this? Young Lord Jiao was once your fiancé. How could I possibly do such a thing? The proprietor, the servant who waited on the room, and the carriage driver are all waiting outside the palace gates." I replied calmly. "If Sister believes she has been wronged, we can ask Her Majesty the Empress to summon them for questioning." She could no longer speak at that moment. A eunuch's sharp voice rang across the pavilion. "Her Majesty the Empress has arrived." Everyone immediately knelt. The empress entered slowly in a bright yellow phoenix robe supported by palace maids. She appeared gentle and dignified. When her gaze landed on me, her smile was almost warm. "So this is the new Madame Julian. You are indeed beautiful." I curtsied. "This subject's wife Shin greets Her Majesty." The empress granted me a seat and ordered a maid to bring plum tea. A pregnant woman need not stand on ceremony. "I have heard there were many rumors in the capital before you entered the Chancellor's household. A woman's reputation is of great importance. Did you feel wronged?" The hall became quiet. Her words sounded compassionate, but they placed the matter of my reputation directly above my head once more. Everyone waited for me to be humiliated. I lifted my gaze and smiled respectfully. "Your Majesty, I do not feel wronged." The empress's brow shifted. I continued. "People gossip because they do not know the truth. I believe the truth will eventually be revealed." The hand holding her teacup paused slightly. "You are remarkably calm. When one has done nothing wrong, there is no reason not to be calm." Before the last word had faded, a cool voice came from outside the hall. "This subject has arrived late." I turned. Julian entered in his court robes. His expression was as distant as ever. As he passed, the young noble women lowered their heads one after another. After greeting the empress, he walked directly to my side before everyone in the hall. He placed a cloak around my shoulders. "The hall is cold." The empress smiled. "Chancellor Julian is very attentive to his wife." Julian tied the cloak beneath my throat. "My wife is pregnant. She should neither listen to filthy words nor suffer cold wind." The women who had mocked me moments earlier looked increasingly uncomfortable. I stared at his profile so close to mine. Suddenly, I remembered the woman I had been in my previous life, freezing in the snow while no one offered her even a scrap of warmth. Now before an entire hall of noble women. Julian had placed his cloak over my shoulders. After the banquet, Julian and I left the palace together. The wind beyond the palace walls was bitterly cold. Yet I did not feel chilled. He suddenly asked, "When did you prepare the jade clasp?" "Before the wedding. You knew Vanessa would provoke you at the banquet." "Vanessa enjoys crying where many people can see her." I smiled. "If she did not cry, how could I place the knife in her hand?" Julian stopped and looked at me. "Lily, you would be well suited to the imperial court." I raised an eyebrow. "A pity I am a woman." His voice was steady. "What of it? Many of the men in court do not possess half your courage." Wind passed through the plum branches, shaking loose a dusting of snow. His words fell against my heart like a flame suddenly kindled in winter. I turned away. The Chancellor should be careful when praising people like this. "What danger is there? You may cause someone to forget that we are merely husband and wife by contract." He looked at me. He did not deny it. Yet the silence in his eyes unsettled me more than any answer could have. After our return from the palace, Julian began allowing me into his study. The Chancellor's study was one of the most heavily guarded places in the estate. The first time Clara accompanied me inside, she softened her footsteps as though afraid she might damage the floor by walking upon it. There were none of the extravagant decorations favored by noblemen. Instead, shelves were filled with case files, maps, military registers, court memorials, and official records. A single pot of white plum blossoms stood beside the window. Its branches were thin and restrained, the flowers beautiful in a way that felt almost cold. Julian placed the documents from the old Lontai Villa investigation before me. The file was absurdly thin. The 15th day of the 3rd month. A fire at Lontai Villa. Chen Lily, legitimate daughter of the Marquis of Xinhuan, frightened into unconsciousness. Grand Chancellor Julian survived an assassination attempt. The attackers disappeared. All evidence was destroyed. A few lines of ink covered the suffering that had ruined my entire previous life. My eyes fixed upon the words Grand Chancellor Julian survived an assassination attempt. "Why were you at Lontai Villa that night?" Julian sat behind the desk, candlelight sharpening the line of his brow. "I was investigating the theft of imperial transport funds. An informant arranged to meet me at the villa." "What happened afterward?" "There was something in the wine. When I left the banquet room, I was attacked. When I awakened, I was in a chamber on the opposite side of the villa. And between those moments, nothing? A blank. My memories were blank as well. I remembered the heavy fragrance in the room, confused footsteps, a burning breath against my skin. Then I remembered awakening amid torn clothing and overturned furniture. I lowered my head and continued turning the pages. Something slipped from between two sheets of paper and struck the desk with a soft click. Half of a broken jade pendant. My hand stopped. Julian looked at me. You recognize it? I did not answer immediately. From a small pouch hidden inside my robes, I drew out another broken half. After my rebirth, I had found it at the bottom of an old box. In my previous life, I had gripped it so tightly while dying that its broken edge sliced into my palm. I placed the pieces together. The patterns matched perfectly. Silence filled the study. Only the candles made a faint sound. Julian rose and came to my side. This is my jade pendant. I looked up at him. When I awakened at Lantai Villa, half of it was in my hand. His expression slowly darkened. I stared at the restored pendant. The truth seemed almost absurd. In my previous life, I had been condemned as unchaste. My engagement had been broken. I had been sent to a country estate and poisoned. Yet the man who supposedly ruined me may have been another victim from the very beginning. We had both been chess pieces in the same scheme. I had simply lost far more. What else do you remember from that night? He asked quietly. I closed my eyes. The shattered images were like paper soaked in water. The harder I tried to grasp them, the more quickly they dissolved. The fragrance was very strong. Someone pushed me into the room. I heard footsteps outside, and I heard a woman's voice. A woman? It was faint. I cannot be certain who she was. He did not pressure me. He placed the joined pendant back on the desk. I will investigate. At that moment, something moved gently inside my abdomen. My hand immediately covered it. Julian's attention dropped to my stomach. What happened? The child moved. He froze. For the first time I saw something close to helplessness cross his face. His hand hovered in the air. He appeared to want to touch me, yet feared overstepping. For reasons I could not explain, the sight softened something inside me. I caught his wrist and placed his palm gently against my abdomen through the layers of cloth. The child moved again. Julian's entire body went still. He lowered his eyes toward my stomach. Even his breathing became quieter. Does the child often do this? Only recently. Does it hurt? No. I spoke softly. It feels like a small fish brushing against me. His palm was usually cool. Yet with it resting over my child, I felt strangely safe. A long time passed before he withdrew his hand. Lily. Yes. No matter who is involved in what happened at Lantai Villa, I will uncover the truth. I looked at him. What if the investigation proves this child is yours? He did not avoid my gaze. Then I owe both you and the child a debt. And if the child is not yours? The same answer. I stared at him. He said it so calmly that my chest began to ache. I married you and brought you into my household. I will not allow anyone to throw you back into the mud. I lowered my eyes. Something seemed lodged in my throat. In my previous life, I had struggled in the mud for so long that I came to believe everyone in the world would simply stand upon the bank and watch me sink. It began snowing again when I left the study. Clara followed with an umbrella. Julian had official matters awaiting him in the front court. Yet he escorted me all the way back to the principal courtyard near the entrance. I stopped. You should not keep doing this. Doing what? Giving me false hope. He looked at me. I tightened my fingers around the jade pendant inside my sleeve. My voice softened. Hope that there truly is someone in this world who might protect me until the end. Snow settled on his shoulders. He did not brush it away. After a moment, he said, "Then do not call it false." My heart struck hard against my ribs. Before I could answer, Marcus hurried toward us. "My Lord Chancellor, we found one of the old servants from Lantai Villa." Julian's eyes sharpened. But Marcus's expression was grim. The man was murdered just after entering the capital. My palm slowly turned cold. Someone was even more afraid than we were of the truth from that night being uncovered. And the person hiding in the darkness had already drawn a blade. As winter deepened, my body grew heavier. The Chancellor's estate appeared peaceful beneath the surface. However, the tension increased with every passing day. Susan remained confined to the Lotus Court, but she had lived in the household for many years. Her influence reached far beyond her courtyard. Occasionally, someone sent pastries, charcoal, or fabric. Everything appeared to have been inspected. Still, I refused to let down my guard. In my previous life, my child had been exchanged amid chaos on the night of her birth. The midwife had belonged to Madame Lu. Something had been mixed into the medicine intended to strengthen me. Even the swaddling cloth had been prepared in advance. After the delivery, I had lost consciousness. When I awakened, I heard my daughter's weak cries outside the door. The sound became softer, farther away, until it disappeared entirely. In this life, I would not allow anyone to come near my child without my permission. From the 7th month of my pregnancy onward, I personally chose every object that entered the birthing chamber. Physician Lu recommended the midwives. Julian's hidden guards watched the rooms where hot water would be prepared. Clara guarded the swaddling cloth day and night. The silver scissors for cutting the cord, the clay pot for boiling ginseng broth, and the cotton sheets beneath me were all inspected 3 times in advance. At first, Julian watched me work until my face turned pale. Then he asked only one question. "Are you afraid?" My fingers stopped over the folded swaddling cloth. "Yes." He said nothing. I lowered my head and stroked my abdomen. "I am afraid I will open my eyes and hear that my child is no longer crying." Something in his expression softened after that. He never again told me to relax. On the 8th day of the 12th month, a violent snowstorm descended upon the capital. After the evening meal, I had consumed only half a bowl of sweetened bird's nest when a heavy pain suddenly dragged through my abdomen. It came too quickly, too violently. The porcelain spoon fell from my hand and shattered across the floor. Clara's face turned white. "My lady," I gripped the edge of the table. Cold sweat soaked through my undergarments. Something was wrong. The child was not yet due. Someone had acted. I clenched my teeth and forced myself to speak. "Do not panic." Tears filled Clara's eyes. "My lady, go to the Chancellor. Seal the principal courtyard. No one is to enter or leave. Bring Physician Lu and the midwives." Clara stumbled out. Soon, every lamp in the courtyard had been lit. Basin after basin of hot water was carried inside. The midwives spoke rapidly around me, urgent but controlled. They helped me into the birthing chamber. The pain grew tighter and sharper, like a knife scraping through my body from within. Noise soon erupted outside. The Dowager Madam had arrived. Several elders from the Julian clan had come as well. Somehow, Susan had escaped from the Lotus Court. She stood outside weeping, claiming she wished to pray for my safety. Even Vanessa had entered the Chancellor's estate beside Madame Lu. She claimed she had heard I was delivering early and could not rest because she was so concerned for her elder sister. The pain blurred my sight, but I still heard her gentle voice. "My sister's child has already been the subject of so much discussion. Now she is delivering early. If something goes wrong, what will happen?" The Dowager Madam snapped. "Be silent." But she did not have Vanessa removed. I understood exactly what they were waiting for. They were waiting for the child to be born, waiting to see the child's face, waiting to use clan law, reputation, and rumor to condemn me again if the child did not resemble the Julian family. The pains came faster. I bit down upon a handkerchief and dug my nails into the side of the bed. Someone opened the door. A midwife cried out, "My Lord Chancellor, the birthing chamber is filled with blood, you cannot enter." I struggled to open my eyes. Beyond the folding screen stood Julian. He did not cross it. He simply placed the restored jade pendant upon the table. "Lily." His voice passed through the wind, the snow, and my pain. It reached me clearly. "I am outside." Tears suddenly fell from my eyes. When I had given birth in my previous life, the people waiting outside had wanted me dead. In this life, someone stood beyond the door and told me he was there. I gripped the blankets and forced myself to follow the midwife's instructions. I no longer knew how much time passed. Then a loud infant cry tore through the storm. "The child is born. It is a girl." My body felt as though it had been dragged from deep water. A ringing filled my ears. My daughter was crying loudly, so loudly that was good. She could cry in this life. She was no longer the tiny candle flame extinguished by the snow. "Let me see her." My voice was barely more than air. But before the child could be placed in my arms, Susan's shrill voice rang from outside. Bring her out. Let the Dowager Madam and the clan elders see her clearly. The Chancellor's household cannot acknowledge a child of unknown origin. My eyes slowly turned cold. The midwife looked at me. I closed my eyes briefly. Then I nodded. My daughter was wrapped in the red brocade swaddling cloth I had prepared with my own hands. The midwife carried her from the birthing chamber through the partially opened door. I saw the courtyard blazing with lantern light. Heavy snow covered every shoulder. Susan stared at the bundle. Vanessa gripped her handkerchief so tightly that the fabric nearly tore. The midwife carefully lifted one corner of the swaddling cloth. Silence descended. Even the storm seemed to stop. The prayer beads in the Dowager Madam's hand snapped. The beads scattered across the ground. All color disappeared from Vanessa's face. Susan staggered backward as though she had seen a ghost. No, that is impossible. Someone whispered in disbelief. She resembles the Chancellor. Too closely. Those eyes, the bridge of the nose, and the small mark behind her left ear, she looks exactly like him. The tension that had held my heart in a vice finally loosened. Julian personally took the child. He held her awkwardly. His body was almost rigid. Yet when he lowered his head toward the tiny face inside the swaddling cloth, his fingers visibly trembled. The man who never lost control in the imperial court slowly reddened around the eyes. The child let out another cry. He immediately lowered his voice. Do not be afraid. The words sounded nothing like the Chancellor feared by the entire court. Snow fell silently. Holding the child in his arms, he turned toward everyone gathered in the courtyard. She is my daughter. Susan collapsed into the snow. Vanessa retreated one step. Madame Lou caught her, but even she had forgotten how to cry. Julian carried the child to the entrance of the birthing chamber through the screen. He looked at me. Lily. I was so exhausted that I could barely keep my eyes open. His voice was hoarse. Did you hear? I looked at the child in his arms slowly. I smiled. I heard. My daughter was alive. She was crying with all her strength. She was not a bastard. She was not a stain. She was not the nameless infant no one had pitted in my previous life. She was Julian's daughter, and she was the life I had stolen back from hell. For 3 days after my daughter's birth, the Chancellor's estate remained silent. It was not the silence of peace. It was the heavy, suffocating stillness before a storm. I remained in bed, recovering from the delivery, while my daughter slept in a cradle beside me. She was still only a tiny bundle. Yet the resemblance to Julian was already unmistakable, especially when she frowned. She looked exactly like a miniature version of the cold-faced Chancellor. Every time Clara saw it, she struggled not to laugh. My lady. With an expression like that, no one will dare bully the young miss when she grows older. I gently touched my daughter's cheek. She does not need to bully anyone, but no one will ever be allowed to bully her. Julian named her Grace, to understand the ways of the world without being stained by them, to become a small light capable of illuminating even the darkest snowy night. When I heard the name, my eyes burned for a long time. In my previous life, she had never even been given a name. On the 3rd day, the elders of the Julian clan arrived. Several senior members of the family sat in the front hall. Their words sounded calm and reasonable, but every sentence pressed down upon us. A child resembling the Chancellor does not necessarily prove the bloodline. The succession of the Julian family cannot be treated carelessly. The child must be tested. His Excellency holds great power. For that very reason, he must give the clan a clear explanation. I sat behind a screen, holding Grace in my arms. My body was still weak, but I refused to hide. In my previous life, I had hidden for too long enough for everyone else to decide my guilt without me. This time, I wanted to hear every question with my own ears, and I wanted to watch them kneel when the truth came. Julian sat in the principal seat. His voice was cool. How do the elders wish to test her? An elderly man with a white beard answered. The blood-merging test. I laughed softly. The sound was not loud, yet everyone in the front hall turned toward the screen. The clan elder frowned. What does Madame Julian find amusing? I rose and stepped out while carrying Grace. Julian immediately stood and came to support me, using his arm for balance. I faced the old man. I am amused that gentlemen who have studied books for an entire lifetime still place their faith in such a crude trick. His face darkened. Madam should speak carefully. Am I wrong? I looked toward the bowl of clear water prepared on the table. If alum is added to the water, the blood of two unrelated people may still blend. If saltpeter is added, the blood of a true father and child may remain separate. Do the elders truly not know this? Or do they merely pretend not to know? The imperial physician holding the bowl gave a violent start. I turned toward him. Imperial physician F.O. In my previous life, he had testified on Vanessa's behalf. He had declared that I became deranged after childbirth and that my daughter's death had simply been fate. Now he had appeared again. Physician F.O. forced a smile. Madam is joking. I have practiced medicine for many years. Why would I ever use such methods? I nodded. Since Physician F.O. has nothing to hide, let Physician Lu inspect the water. Physician Fo's expression changed at once. Footsteps sounded outside. Physician Lu entered with his medicine case. After bowing to Julian, he picked up the bowl and smelled it once. Then he laughed coldly. Alum, saltpeter, even coagulating herb. Physician F.O., is this an examination of bloodline or a street performance? Physician F.O. dropped to his knees. The hall erupted. The clan elders exchanged horrified looks. Julian's voice turned to ice. Who instructed you? Physician F.O. shook so violently that his teeth knocked together. It was someone from Lady Susan's household. They gave me silver notes and said I needed only to make a small alteration. Susan was dragged into the hall with her hair disordered and all traces of her former pride gone. The moment she saw Julian, she crawled toward him and wept. Cousin, I only feared you were being deceived. I never meant to harm you. Holding Grace, I watched her quietly. Lady Susan, because you feared the Chancellor was being deceived, you sent incense to damage my pregnancy. You attempted to exchange my child during the birth. And now you have bribed a physician to falsify a bloodline test. I smiled faintly. Your concern is truly terrifying. Susan shrieked. You are lying. You were merely fortunate enough to give birth to a child who resembles my cousin. Who knows whether you deliberately found a man who looked like him? Before she could finish, Julian held the teacup in his hand to the floor. Porcelain shattered across the tiles. Susan fell silent in terror. Julian turned toward Marcus. Sent her to the capital magistrate's office. She attempted to murder the Chancellor's wife and legitimate daughter. Let the law deal with her. The Dowager Madam rose in alarm. Julian, she is still your cousin. Julian took Grace from my arms. He now held her far more steadily than before. When she raised her hand against my wife and daughter, did she remember that I was her cousin? The Dowager Madam's face turned gray. She had no answer. At that moment, Physician Lu suddenly spoke. My Lord Chancellor, since the clan elders are present, there is another matter I can no longer conceal. He took a scroll of medical records from his case. The condition everyone has described as Your Excellency's natural inability to father children was never natural. It was caused by years of exposure to frostchylene powder. This substance is deeply cold in nature. When consumed over a long period, it weakens a man's pulse and creates the appearance of infertility. But the damage is not necessarily beyond treatment. The front hall erupted for a second time. I saw Julian's fingers tighten around Grace. She made a small sound in his arms. He immediately relaxed and lowered his head to soothe her. One clan elder exclaimed. Then the Chancellor was never incapable of fathering a child. Physician Lu answered coldly. Not only was he capable, but without years of poisoning, he should have had children long ago. I looked at Julian. He did not look at the clan elders. He did not look at Physician F.O. kneeling upon the floor. He looked only at the daughter in his arms. At that moment, I finally understood. The rumor that he could never have children was not merely an insult. Someone had deliberately cut away every path before him. They intended to turn him into an isolated minister with no wife, no children, no roots, and no family ties. The child in my womb had been the accident they never anticipated. Julian handed Grace to the wet nurse and walked toward me before everyone present. He took my hand. Lily. I raised my eyes. From the beginning, I never doubted you. My eyes grew hot. But I did not cry. I smiled instead. Then Your Excellency should remember those words. After today, the people who doubted me should be the ones unable to sleep. A trace of a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. My wife is correct. After that day, every rumor in the capital changed. The people who once condemned me for carrying a bastard into the Chancellor's household now competed to claim that Julian and I had been joined by heaven itself. Those who had mocked him as a man without an heir suddenly closed their mouths. But I knew the matter was not over. The true blade remained hidden behind the palace walls. 10 days after Grace's birth, Vanessa sent a formal visiting card. Its words were filled with affection and remorse. She claimed that worry for me had left her unable to eat or sleep. She wished to visit the Chancellor's estate personally and beg my forgiveness. Clara laughed coldly after reading it. Second Lady Shen still has the nerve to come here. I said nothing. The card contained something else, an old embroidered fragrance pouch. The corners were worn, but the stitching remained fine. Beneath the inner layer, I could feel the faint outline of hidden threadwork. It was the first fragrance pouch I had ever embroidered under my birth mother's instruction. I had carried it with me on the night of the Lantai Villa incident. When I awakened, it was gone. In my previous life, I never saw it again. Now it had appeared in Vanessa's possession. I studied the pouch for a long time. Then I smiled. Clara trembled with fury. She stole your possession and still dares bring it here. She did not bring it merely to return it. I placed the pouch back with the visiting card. She intends to use it to steal someone else's life. Vanessa arrived dressed with deliberate simplicity. The moment she entered the room, she knelt. Her tears fell with perfect timing. Sister, I know you hate me, but there are things I can no longer hide. I sat on a couch while Grace slept in her cradle. Julian was reading official memorials nearby. At Vanessa's words, he lifted his eyes. She saw him sitting there. A flash of uncontrollable excitement appeared in her expression. She bit her lip and allowed her voice to tremble. My Lord Chancellor, the person who saved you that night at Lantai Villa was me. The room became quiet. Clara nearly cursed aloud, but I stopped her with one raised hand. I lifted my teacup and slowly blew the leaves away from the surface. Vanessa continued. That night, I went to the villa to search for my sister. I entered the rear courtyard by mistake and saw Your Excellency unconscious from poison. I feared the assassins would return, so I helped you into a chamber. Later, my sister also entered. I was afraid the matter would damage her reputation, so I never dared speak of it. Julian set down the memorial in his hand. Evidence. Vanessa immediately produced the fragrance pouch. This was left inside the room that night. If Your Excellency does not believe me, you may examine it. I could no longer suppress my laughter. She looked up at me, appearing pleased that she had finally forced me to lose control. What is sister laughing at? I placed down my teacup. At your courage. You stole something from me, carried it into the Chancellor's estate, and now intend to use it to claim another person's identity. Her face paled. Sister, how can you say such a thing? This pouch clearly belongs to me. Does it? I held out one hand toward Clara. She immediately brought me a pair of embroidery scissors. I took the scissors and cut open the inner layer of the pouch in front of everyone. A line of tiny embroidered characters appeared beneath the lining. Lily's first embroidery, made for mother. Vanessa's face turned gray. I tossed the pouch before her. If you intended to claim stolen evidence as your own, sister, you should at least have opened it first. Julian looked toward Marcus. Marcus presented a written record. My Lord Chancellor, on the night of the incident at Lantai Villa, Second Lady Shen was not at the villa. She was at Orchid Fragrance Pavilion with young Lord Jiao. The proprietor, the servant, and the carriage driver can all testify. Vanessa jerked her head upward. Young Lord Jiao would never say such a thing. The moment the words left her mouth, she froze. I spoke softly. How does sister know what young Lord Jiao would or would not say? The room became deathly quiet at last. Vanessa panicked. She crawled forward on her knees and attempted to grasp the hem of my skirt. Sister, I was only afraid. I did not intend to harm you. I merely wanted to find a road for myself. I slowly pulled my skirt away from her reaching hand. Your road was built upon my corpse. Her sobbing stopped. I looked at the face I had once hated with every part of my soul. She was still beautiful. She could still cry on command. She still knew how to make herself appear more pitiful than anyone else. But in this life, I was no longer the Lily whose heart softened whenever she saw tears. Vanessa, your greatest mistake was not your greed. It was your belief that whenever you cried, someone else should surrender the road beneath their feet. Hatred finally emerged in her eyes. Why? She stared at me. Why could you lose your chastity and still marry into the Chancellor's household? Why was the child actually his? Why does fortune always favor you instead of me? I looked at her. In my previous life, I had also asked why. Why had I been destroyed when I had done nothing wrong? But I later understood that cruelty often had no reason. I answered calmly. Because I did not harm anyone. Julian rose. Send Lady Shin back to the Marquis estate. Send the witness statements from Orchid Fragrance Pavilion and young Lord Joe's testimony to the Capital Magistrate's office for official record. Vanessa collapsed. Reputation was the thing she valued most. Now it would become the weapon that devoured her. As she was dragged away, Grace woke inside the cradle and began to cry. I moved to pick her up. Julian reached her first. His movements were still somewhat rigid, but far more skilled than they had been a few days earlier. The instant Grace entered his arms, however, she cried even louder. I could not help laughing. She does not like the way you are holding her. Julian frowned at the tiny wrinkled face. She was sleeping perfectly well a moment ago. You frightened her. I did not speak. Your expression is too cold. He looked at me. I took Grace from his arms. As soon as she settled against me, her cries softened to wounded little whimpers. Julian remained silent for a moment. Her temper resembles yours. I raised an eyebrow. Is the Chancellor praising me or complaining about me? He looked at the child in my arms. Then he looked at me. Praising you. I paused. He lifted one hand and brushed a loose strand of hair away from my temple. Lily. It was the first time he had called me that, not the distant and formal Madame Julian. Only Lily. I lowered my head to soothe Grace. The tips of my ears grew warm. Outside, the storm had not stopped. Inside, the brazier burned brightly. For one brief moment, I almost forgot that our marriage had begun with nothing more than a written contract. After Vanessa returned to the Marquis estate, the Gu family quickly withdrew all interest in arranging a marriage with her. Most of her reputation was destroyed. Madame Lu became frantic. She repeatedly sent servants to request an audience with me, but Marcus turned them away at the gates. I was in no hurry to deal with them. The more frightened prey became, the more recklessly it ran. I was waiting for them to reveal their own weakness. 3 days later, Clara retrieved a wooden box from an old residence belonging to my mother. It was part of the property she had left behind. In my previous life, I had never known that a secret ledger was hidden beneath the lining of her dowry account books. I used a thin blade to pry open the bottom of the box. There was indeed a narrow seam. Inside the hidden compartment lay a yellowed booklet. My hand stopped after I opened the first page. Madame Lu, Palace Eunuchs, Medicinal Merchants, the Steward of Lantai Villa. Every payment was recorded clearly. On the 14th day of the 3rd month, Madame Lu delivered 3,000 taels of silver to the palace. On the 15th, Frostchylene powder was removed from the Imperial Secret Medicine Storehouse. On the night of the 15th, Lantai Villa caught fire. On the 16th, the villa steward died suddenly and his family moved to Jiangnan. My fingertips slowly turned cold. So that was the truth. In my previous life, I had believed Madame Lu and Vanessa were the only people responsible for destroying me. But the hand that had truly passed them the blade was hidden within the palace. I carried the ledger to Julian's study. He was sitting behind his desk, shaking a small rattle for Grace. The Grand Chancellor of the Empire held a jade rattle in one hand and wore an expression as grave as if he were interrogating a criminal. Grace lay in her cradle, watching him with round eyes. He shook it once. She did not react. He shook it again. She yawned. I stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. Your Excellency looks more frightening while entertaining a child than while questioning a prisoner. Julian paused. I walked inside and placed the ledger upon the desk. My mother's secret accounts. He read several pages. The warmth in the room disappeared from his expression. The Imperial Secret Medicine Storehouse? I said quietly. Was it the Empress? He did not answer immediately. The Empress's maternal family, the Zhu clan, has extended its control into the Imperial transport system. I have been investigating them for half a year. My inquiries have already begun damaging their foundation. He closed the ledger. If I possess no wife or heir, and if my reputation were destroyed, officials at court could force me to surrender my authority to investigate the bureaucracy. The plot at Lantai Villa was aimed at more than you and me as individuals. I looked down at the accounts. At that moment, the pieces of my previous life finally began to fit together. Why I had been sent to Lantai Villa. Why Julian had been there. Why every trace of evidence had been destroyed. Why someone had been so desperate to kill my child after her birth, because she carried Julian's blood. She was the greatest flaw in their entire scheme. Julian suddenly looked at me. What follows will be dangerous. I know. If you wish to leave, I can arrange it immediately. There is a residence in the Western District. Guards, wet nurses, and silver have already been prepared. You may take Grace there. No one will find you. I stared at him. You prepared it already. The third condition in our agreement. I gave you my word. My heart felt as though something had struck it gently. He had truly preserved a road of retreat for me. It was not a lie intended to comfort me. It was not a test. He had prepared everything long ago. I walked toward the cradle and looked down at Grace's sleeping face. Julian. He turned toward me. Do you want me to leave? He did not answer immediately. Wind carried snow beyond the windows. Only the quiet crackle of charcoal filled the study. After a long time, he said, no. The word was soft, yet it carried more weight than any declaration of love. I turned to face him. He stood beside the desk, his sleeves falling around him. His features remained composed, but something in his eyes could no longer be concealed. The contract can be discarded, he said. If you choose to leave, I will protect you for the rest of your life. If you choose to remain, I wish to treat you with sincerity. I lowered my gaze, avoiding the directness of his eyes. In my previous life, Jiu Chongheng had deceived me with a few gentle sentences. I had believed an engagement meant protection. I had believed blood ties meant home. In this life, I did not dare trust anyone easily. But Julian was different. He did not demand my trust. He simply placed the choice in my hands. I lifted Grace from the cradle and held her out to him. He took her instinctively. His movements were now steady. Grace awakened and drew her little brows together, preparing to cry. I stepped back and smiled. If the Chancellor wishes to treat me sincerely, he should first learn how to put his daughter to sleep. Julian looked down at the child in his arms. For once, he appeared uncertain how. Learn. Grace's cries grew louder. Julian stiffened and began patting her awkwardly. The more he tried, the more chaotic the motion became. I finally burst into laughter. He raised his eyes toward me as I laughed. My eyes slowly filled with tears. In my previous life, I had never seen my daughter held by her father. She had possessed no name, no full-month celebration, no father who stood helplessly learning how to comfort her. Now all of it was before me. I stepped forward. Together we supported the swaddling cloth and gently soothed Grace. Her crying gradually faded. She listens to you, Julian said quietly. Because I am her mother. And what am I? I looked up. His question was quiet, but it made my heart burn. I did not answer. Instead, I placed Grace's tiny hand against his finger. Her fingers curled around him and refused to release their grip. First, learn how to be her father. He looked down at our daughter. The corner of his mouth slowly lifted. All right. After that night, the marriage agreement was placed at the bottom of a locked box. Neither of us spoke of destroying it, but we both understood that something had already changed. Before Grace's full-month celebration, another invitation arrived from the palace. The Empress intended to host the banquet personally. It was presented as a celebration. In truth, it was an interrogation. When the invitation reached the principal courtyard, I was sewing a pair of tiny tiger-shaped shoes for Grace. Julian sat nearby, reading through official accounts. After hearing Marcus's report, he gave only 2 words. We will not go. I pushed the needle through the embroidered shoe. We must go. Julian frowned. You have not fully recovered. The Empress is waiting for me to be too frightened to appear. I bit through the thread. If I refuse, she will claim the Chancellor's household is hiding something. If I attend, she will be the one forced to panic. He studied me. Are you prepared? I placed the completed shoe in the basket. In my previous life, they dragged me onto a platform and judged me. In this life, I would like to sit in judgment for once. Grace's full-month banquet was held in the Palace of Eternal Joy. The moment I entered the hall carrying her, every gaze fell upon the child's face. That small face, almost identical to Julian's, carried more force than 1,000 explanations. The smiles of several noble women stiffened. The Empress sat upon the raised seat, looking dignified and benevolent. What a beautiful child! Her eyes and features resembled the Chancellor perfectly. I bowed. Thank you for your Majesty's praise. She granted me a seat and presented Grace with a golden longevity lock, speaking with the warmth of someone who truly shared our happiness. After several rounds of wine and conversation, someone finally raised the subject they had all been waiting for. It was Lady Ju, the Empress's niece. She smiled. There are still some foolish people in the capital who whisper that young Lady Julian's birth came at a rather convenient time. Since so many distinguished guests are gathered here today, why not ask the Imperial Medical Bureau to conduct another public bloodline examination? Then no one will have reason to gossip again. The hall fell silent. Julian was about to speak. I placed my hand lightly upon his sleeve. Then I rose and bowed toward the Empress. Your Majesty, since Lady Ju has mentioned the gossip of the public, this subject's wife also has several questions. The Empress's smile remained unchanged. Speak. Holding Grace, I kept my voice calm. On the 15th day of the 3rd month, why was frost-chylene powder removed from the Imperial Secret Medicine Storehouse? The Empress's fingers paused. Lady Ju's expression changed. Madame Julian, what nonsense are you speaking? I accepted the ledger from Clara. I would also like to know why Madame Lu, the second wife of the Marquis of Xinhuan, exchanged large sums of silver with palace eunuchs. Why did the steward of Lantai Villa die suddenly? And why did his family travel to Jiangnan using documents issued through palace connections? Shock rippled through the hall. The smile finally faded from the Empress's face. Madame Julian, you stand at a palace banquet and accuse the Empress. Do you understand the crime you are committing? I knelt, but my back remained straight. This subject's wife would never dare fabricate an accusation. The evidence is here. I ask your Majesty and His Majesty the Emperor to investigate. Julian stepped to my side. He did not place me behind him. He stood beside me. This subject, Julian, requests a formal investigation into the frost-chylene powder case. The Empress looked at him coldly. Chancellor Julian, do you trust only her claims? I trust evidence. With a slight movement of his hand, Marcus presented another stack of documents, the statements of the surviving guards from Lantai Villa, copies of records from the Imperial Medicine Storehouse, Physician Fo's confession, and the travel permits used by the Villa steward's family at the Jiangnan relay stations. All are here. I lifted my eyes toward the Empress. She remained seated with perfect dignity, but beneath her sleeve, one hand had tightened around the arm of her chair. At that moment, a eunuch announced from outside, His Majesty the Emperor has arrived. Everyone knelt. The Emperor entered with a dark expression. He looked first at Julian, then at the ledger in my hands. Present it. I offered it with both hands. My fingers did not tremble. In my previous life, whenever I was questioned, I had been too afraid even to lift my head. In this life, I knelt inside the imperial palace with my daughter in my arms and my husband standing beside me. I had not come to beg them to believe me. I had come to make disbelief impossible. The Emperor read through the ledger. His expression grew colder with every page. At last, the Empress knelt. Your Majesty, this consort knew nothing of these matters. The servants beneath me must have acted without permission. Julian spoke evenly. If Her Majesty was unaware, then this subject requests permission to investigate the Ju clan, Her Majesty's maternal family. The Empress jerked her head upward. The Emperor looked at her. Then he spoke a single word. Granted. The word fell. The entire hall seemed to freeze. Lady Ju collapsed to the floor. I lowered my eyes and gently patted Grace's back. She slept peacefully as though unaware that during her full-month banquet, she had shaken half the palace from its foundations. Snow began falling again when we left the palace. Julian pulled my cloak more closely around me. Are you tired? Yes. Were you afraid? I looked at the child in my arms. No. He glanced at me. Then he said quietly, You did well today. I smiled. Only well? He considered this seriously. Better than I would have done. I could not stop myself from laughing. Snow filled the air beyond the palace walls. But for the first time, the road ahead did not seem made only of cold. After the investigation into the Empress's maternal family began, the capital remained unsettled for half a month. Several Jew residences were sealed. The case involving stolen imperial transport silver exposed a chain of officials. The truth behind the Frostchylene powder also gradually came to light. The Jew clan had feared Julian's investigation. They joined forces with palace eunuchs and secretly placed poison in his food and medicine over many years, creating the appearance that he could never father a child. The incident at Lontai Villa had been the second part of their plan. They drugged Julian until he lost control. Then they arranged for me, the legitimate daughter of a marquis, to become involved. They intended to use my ruined reputation to destroy him. If I killed myself, there would be no surviving witness. If I remained alive, I would become a stain they could use against him. If a child was born, they would either steal it or kill it. In my previous life, they had almost succeeded. But in this life, I survived. Grace survived as well. Madame Lou and Vanessa finally became terrified. After the Jew clan lost power, they had no one left to protect them. My father was also summoned for questioning by the capital magistrate's office. Madame Lou attempted to flee several times, but even the servants of the Marquis estate prevented her. I knew she would eventually come to the Chancellor's household. In my previous life, she had known of a hidden passage leading through a rear entrance. Susan had originally shown it to her so that they could exchange the swaddling cloth after my child was born. Later, it became their escape route. In this life, I ordered Marcus to guard it in advance. As expected, 7 nights later, rapid footsteps sounded beyond the principal courtyard. Marcus entered. My lady, we caught them. I rose and reached for an outer robe. Julian placed one hand upon my shoulder. I will go. No. I looked at him. This debt is mine to settle. At the end of the hidden passage, Madame Lou and Vanessa had been forced to their knees. Madame Lou's hair had come loose. Nothing remained of the dignity she once wore as mistress of the Marquis of Chinoise's household. Vanessa was wrapped in a cloak, her face white. When she saw me, fear and hatred filled her eyes. Sister, she prepared to cry again. Do not cry. I cut her off. You are not standing before young Lord Jiao. Father is not here. Who do you expect your tears to persuade? Her lips trembled. Madame Lou suddenly screamed. Lily, I raised you for more than 10 years. Now that you have risen above us, do you intend to force us both to death? I looked at her. She had said similar words in my previous life. The Marquis estate raised you. You should consider the family. Then she had carried poison to me and watched me die. I gestured for Clara to bring forward a wooden box. Inside lay a celadone cup painted with lotus blossoms. The moment Madame Lou saw it, her face became deathly pale. It belonged to her favorite tea set. In my previous life, she had used a cup exactly like it to force poison down my throat. I picked it up and placed it gently before her. Do you still recognize this, Mother? Her voice trembled. Where did you find that? In the Marquis estate storehouse. I watched her. The poison medicine you gave me in my previous life was served in a cup like this. Vanessa stared at me in terror. What are you talking about? What previous life? I did not explain. There were secrets you did not need to understand. I kept my attention on Madame Lou. I truly considered you my mother once. My birth mother died when I was young. I believed that if I behaved well enough, you might eventually feel some affection for me. I laughed softly. But you taught me that a wolf remains a wolf, even when it wears human skin. You are insane, Madame Lou screamed. Perhaps. I lowered my voice. A person who has already died once becomes insane in a very clear-minded way. Julian stood beside me without interrupting, but his hand remained at my back as though he feared old hatred might drag me into the abyss again. I drew a breath. Then I turned to Marcus. Send them to the capital magistrate's office. Present all the evidence against Madame Lu, stealing the first wife's dowry, colluding with the palace, attempting to murder the legitimate daughter of the Marquis estate, and plotting against the legitimate daughter of the Chancellor's household. Vanessa participated in the Lantai Villa scheme, attempted to claim stolen evidence, and maintained an improper relationship with an engaged man. Record everything. Madame Lu finally broke. She lunged toward me, but the guards forced her down. Lily, you cannot do this to me. Your father will never allow it. I crouched before her. Father? I smiled. The Marquis of Xinwan concealed his second wife's crimes, allowed her to steal his dead wife's dowry, and permitted the attempted murder of his legitimate daughter. He may not even be able to preserve his own life and title. Madame Lu collapsed. Vanessa shook her head, sobbing. Sister, I was wrong. I truly understand now. Please spare me. I will not marry young Lord Jiao. I do not want anything anymore. I looked at her young and beautiful face. In my previous life, that face had bent close to mine, and she had whispered, Sister, your child is gone. You should leave as well. I stood. It is too late. Her screams followed her as the guards dragged her away. They were raw and desperate, but I felt neither pleasure nor sympathy, only a peace that had arrived far too late. The snow was deep along the road back to the principal courtyard. Halfway there, I stopped. Julian did not urge me forward. He simply stood beside me beneath the covered corridor. I watched the snow fill the night. When I died in my previous life, it was snowing like this. He took my hand. It will never mean the same thing again. I looked at him. He spoke slowly, every word clear. From now on, snowy nights will mean Grace's full-month celebration. They will mean you and I returning home. They will not mean death and separation. Tears suddenly rose. This time I did not force them back. I leaned into his arms. He carried the chill of snow and the faint fragrance of medicine. He said nothing. He simply placed one hand protectively behind my head, as though holding something precious that had once been lost. That night I dreamed of the woman I had been in my previous life. She stood alone in the snow, but this time she held her daughter in her arms. She looked at me. She smiled through her tears. Then she turned and walked into the brightness of the snow. She never looked back. The Frostchilene powder case required 3 months to reach its conclusion. The Empress was confined within the Palace of Long Autumn. The Zhu clan lost its titles and was exiled. The physicians, eunuchs, and villa officials involved in the conspiracy were all sentenced according to the law. The Marquis of Xinwan's household did not escape judgment. My father was stripped of his title and investigated. Madame Lu was sentenced to exile 3,000 li away. Vanessa was found guilty of attempting to harm her legitimate elder sister and fabricating evidence to accuse others. She was exiled with her mother. On the day they departed, her hair hung loose around her face. When she saw me from inside the prison cart, she suddenly screamed my name. Sister, I was wrong. I truly know I was wrong. I stood on the upper floor of a tea house with Grace in my arms. I did not go down. Clara asked, Do you wish to see her, my lady? I shook my head. There was no need. The law had recovered what she owed me from my previous life. I would not waste the remainder of this one hating her. After the Marquis estate was sealed, I recovered the entirety of my mother's dowry. The shops, fields, and old residences that Madame Lu and Vanessa had once fought to possess returned to my hands. I converted 3 of the shops into charitable properties. 1 sheltered women who had nowhere else to go. 1 provided medicine and treatment for widows, orphans, and poor mothers. The 3rd taught women to read, keep accounts, sew, and conduct business. When Julian learned what I had done, he asked only one question. Do you have enough money? Yes. The next day, Marcus delivered a box of property deeds. When I opened it, I found deeds for 2,000 mu of fertile farmland outside the capital and 6 shops within the city. I carried the box to Julian's study. What is this? He was reviewing memorials. At my question, he lifted his eyes. Private property for my wife. It is too much. I earn a great deal. His perfectly serious answer left me momentarily speechless. Julian placed down his brush and walked toward me. If you intend to save people, you must have sufficient strength behind you. I looked at the deeds inside the box. Then I smiled. In my previous life, I had not even been able to protect my own life. Now someone placed strength directly into my hands and spoke as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. On Grace's first birthday, the Chancellor's household held a small celebration. We invited only Physician Lou, several noble women we trusted, and the proprietor of Orchid Fragrance Pavilion and his wife, who had testified on my behalf. The Dowager Madam now treated me with great care. She had once trusted Susan. She had also doubted me. After learning what Susan had done, she fell ill for several days. When she recovered, she came personally to the principal courtyard and apologized. I did not become close to her, but I did not deliberately make her life difficult. Older people sometimes trust the wrong person. As long as she no longer handed others the knife, I was willing to preserve her dignity. During the birthday celebration, Grace was placed at the center of a soft carpet for the traditional choosing ceremony. Many objects were arranged before her: a ceremonial tablet, a book, an abacus, rouge, a golden seal, a small sword, and a peony hairpin I had placed there myself. Everyone gathered to watch. Julian stood beside me. He looked more serious than he did at morning court. I whispered, "Why is Your Excellency so nervous?" "I am not. The tea in your hand has gone cold." He silently put down the cup. Grace crawled across the carpet. She first touched the abacus. Then she pushed it aside with what looked like disdain. Next, she crawled toward the ceremonial tablet and seized it. The Dowager Madam laughed. "Excellent. She resembles her father. She will accomplish great things." A faint smile appeared on Julian's face. But a moment later, Grace released the tablet and crawled toward me. She grabbed the peony hairpin. Then she picked up the tablet again with her other hand. One hand held her father's symbol of office. The other held her mother's hairpin. She babbled happily and refused to release either one. Everyone in the hall laughed. Julian lowered his head and spoke beside my ear. "She intends to keep both of us." I looked at our daughter. My eyes grew warm. In my previous life, I had not lived long enough to see her reach 1 month. I had never heard her cry so loudly. Never watched her choose objects on her first birthday. Never stood inside a hall filled with warm lantern light, addressed with respect as Madame Julian, and treasured by those around me. Snow began to fall outside the window. I looked up. It drifted lightly, like a farewell that had arrived 1 year too late. Julian took my hand. "Are you cold?" I shook my head. "No." He followed my gaze toward the window. "Are you remembering the past?" "Yes." I did not hide it from him. Those wounds did not need to be spoken of every day, but I no longer needed to pretend they had never existed. After a moment, Julian tightened his hold upon my hand. "The past is over." I watched Clara lift Grace from the carpet. Our daughter still clutched my hairpin in one tiny hand. Her laughter rang through the room. He was right. It was over. The Lily who had lost her child and herself in that snowy night, who had died with hatred filling her heart, could finally sleep. After the guests departed, I carried Grace back toward the principal courtyard. Julian held the umbrella above us. Snow struck the surface with a soft, continuous rustling. At the end of the corridor, I stopped. "Julian." He turned toward me. "I no longer need the third condition in our agreement." Something moved in his eyes. "Have you decided?" "Yes." I lowered my gaze to Grace. Then I looked at him. "I am not leaving." For a moment, even the wind and snow seemed to fall silent. Julian stared at me for a long time. Just as his gaze began making me uncomfortable, he bent down and gathered both me and Grace into his arms. His embrace was steady, so steady that all the storms of my previous life finally seemed to have found a place to rest. I heard him speak quietly. "All right." Snow covered the courtyard. Lantern light shone upon the vermilion gates of the Chancellor's estate and stretched our 3 shadows across the ground. Once I had believed I was reborn for revenge. Only later did I understand that revenge merely pulled the blade from an old wound. True rebirth meant no longer fearing snowy nights. No longer fearing rumors. No longer fearing that everyone I loved would abandon me. I had my daughter. I had the dignity I had reclaimed with my own hands. I had someone willing to walk beside me rather than drag me behind him. Most importantly, I still possessed a heart that had crawled out of hell and chosen to live well. Grace slept peacefully in my arms. Julian brushed snow from my hair. I looked at the white sky and smiled. In this life, I had finally carried both my daughter and myself out of winter and into spring.